So I'm welcoming everybody and the governor here to Lynn. I just want to say a couple quick things about the building that we're in. 4 months ago, when this whole pandemic started, we knew there was going to be a concern on feeding people in the city of Lynn, seniors and families. There's been over 1.8 million meals distributed out of this building since March. And the Salvation Army has just been so instrumental in making that happen. They're not just taking care of families here in Lynn, but they're also taking care of families in Nahat, Swampscott, Chelsea, Saugus, and Linfield. I mean, it's just been so overwhelming. And I also want to mention the outstanding job that our governor has done for us in Massachusetts. He's just been an outstanding leader, and I think he's done the best out of any governor, a president, or anybody in this country. So I just want to say thank you to our governor again. Thank you. Major's going to come up and say a few words. Major.
First, I want to welcome you to the Salvation Army Lynn Corps Community Center. I'm Major Marcus Jugenheimer, the General Secretary of the Salvation Army Massachusetts Division. This is just one of the 32 Salvation Army Corps Community Centers around Massachusetts that were able to step up and provide critical services during our COVID-19 pandemic response. For more than 150 years, the Salvation Army has been serving our neighbors in need, whether it's providing food for the hungry, providing shelter for the homeless, or responding in times of disaster. We are and will be here for good. Today, we welcome Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito. We're also joined by Secretary Sutters, Secretary Theoharides, and Massachusetts Emergency Management Director Samantha Phillips. Thank you all for being here. This week, we are recognizing a significant milestone. Thanks to the Baker administration and MEMA's support, along with the support of our communities, the Salvation Army has distributed more than 8 million meals in Massachusetts just since March. The Salvation Army, as has already been mentioned, the Salvation Army here in Lynn is responsible for more than 1.8 million of those meals. And for anyone who has driven by and seen the line of cars outside for our drive-through food pantry, it's evident that the challenge of food insecurity continues to be a growing issue here locally, and this is the same across the Commonwealth and certainly across the nation. For the past 8 weeks, the Salvation Army has received 20 tractor-trailer loads carrying 25,000 emergency food boxes per week into Massachusetts. These are being used for immediate distribution to help our neighbors in need. And this is where the governor and MEMA come in. As COVID started to impact the Commonwealth, our team at the Salvation Army, who were already providing emergency feeding throughout the Commonwealth, ramped up our services. We pivoted our existing food programs to provide additional prepared meals and food boxes utilizing COVID safety guidelines. Our emergency disaster services team was activated and immediately established 6 hubs across Massachusetts to begin building out emergency food boxes. Each box includes shelf-stable food items such as pasta, rice, beans, peanut butter, all the canned vegetables and fruits, and it can provide food resources to a family for multiple days. Through the MEMA Feeding Task Force, the Salvation Army Emergency Disaster Services helped coordinate food deliveries to critical need areas, including the hotels housing the COVID positive, the homeless, and other at-risk populations. Our emergency deployment with MEMA and the National Guard allowed us to provide 31,000 meals a week to the city of Chelsea while that was a hot spot in our state. As the needs continued to grow, food insecurity increased, and the cascading consequences of COVID affected more and more people. The Salvation Army and MEMA, through the Governor's Task Force, drafted a plan to provide an additional 225,000 emergency food boxes like the ones you see behind me to the Commonwealth. These emergency pantry food boxes were distributed directly to the 4 primary Massachusetts food banks, which would then distributed them directly to the hundreds of food pantries in their existing networks. Additional food boxes are being stored and distributed by the Salvation Army Emergency Disaster Services and MEMA to deploy to any critical need areas. Throughout these difficult times, this powerful partnership is helping those facing food insecurity. The Salvation Army is here for good, and we are invested in continuing to address these immediate needs as well as the long-term impacts of this COVID pandemic. And now it is my honor to introduce and welcome to the podium Governor Charlie Baker.
So first of all, I want to thank the Salvation Army for giving me the shortest commute I've had in a really long time. It's important to me. It may not be important to others, but mostly what I want to say is what an incredible partner the Salvation Army has been to the Commonwealth and to the people of Massachusetts over the course of the past 150 days or so. I want you to think a little bit about that math that the Major just talked about. Since March, which is basically 150 days ago, this location has distributed 1.8 million meals. Statewide, 150 days, Salvation Army has distributed 8 million meals. I can't go anywhere in Massachusetts that has something to do with food without seeing these food boxes somewhere in the warehouse, the storeroom, the front room of every organization that's working to make sure that people in Massachusetts have enough to eat during these incredibly difficult times. What was the number? What was the number you gave us about the number of folks? 70? Was it 70 families a day before COVID?
Yes.
And what is it now?
500.
Gone from 70 families a day to 500 families a day since COVID began. And this is a story that's playing out in place after place after place across the Commonwealth. And if it weren't for the work of organizations like this, and the teammates from MEMA and Health and Human Services and our Food Insecurity Task Force and our teammates in local government, and literally the hundreds, thousands of volunteers who step up and make these organizations have the ability to flex and expand to meet the demand, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. So to everybody who's part of this team, and especially to the folks here today from the Lynn Salvation Army, I just want to say God bless and thank you for all that you do. We just had a chance to take a walk through the food pantry operations and hear about the work. What's particularly interesting is if you actually look at the pantry that was operating before COVID, it's a nice, cozy, quiet little place where people could go in and sort of pick what they were looking for off the shelves. And in a very short period of time, you've managed to turn that from being a relatively small but effective delivery model to something that's been able to scale to do basically 10 times what you were doing before in a very short period of time. That 8 million meal milestone is an incredibly important one when you think about the work of the Salvation Army generally and the integral role they've played in helping so many of us provide relief and support for people here in Massachusetts. But I fully expect that over the course of many months as we go forward here with COVID, the Salvation Army will continue to exceed everybody's expectation time and time again. But before we talk about our program here today around food, I do want to give our update on COVID-19 cases, testing, and hospitalizations. Yesterday, the state reported that almost 8 million new people were tested for COVID-19. In total, we've delivered about 1.3 million tests Yesterday, there were 143 new positive cases, and that brings the statewide total to about 107,000. And the 7-day average for positive test rates remains at about 1.7%. There are currently about 513 people hospitalized for COVID-19 statewide, and 63 of those are in the ICU. The 3-day average for the number of patients in the hospital is down 86% since the middle of August. And as of yesterday, 4 hospitals were using surge capacity, but a lot of that surge capacity was med-surge capacity. It wasn't related to COVID. We'll obviously continue to monitor all of this data as we continue to reopen, but I do want to point out that when we reopened under the plan that was developed by our Reopening Advisory Board, the Lieutenant Governor, and Secretary Mike Keneally, we actually had a higher positive test rate 2.5 months ago than we have today, which speaks not only to the strategic decision-making that went into developing and implementing that plan, but it also speaks in a very big way to the work that's continued to be done by the people of Massachusetts to do the things that we know are most successful in containing the virus and reducing the spread. Wearing face coverings, distancing wherever you can, outdoors if you can be versus indoors, and taking advantage of every chance and every opportunity to spread the word and encourage others to comply with the rules that have been developed. And that, in some respects, is one of the most important elements of why I believe we've been so successful so far in containing COVID-19. I do want to talk a little bit about our Stop the Spread program, which we started on July 10th. That brings free testing to communities that have had high positive test rates in the past and low test results and lower numbers of tests lately. That initiative is up and running in 8 communities, including in Lynn, which is where we are today. The 2 sites in Lynn will be open through the middle of August. We know that targeted testing and tracing, combined with the things that individuals can do to stop the spread, can work. And in some respects, it's how Massachusetts and Lynn have been able to reopen at a point in time and continue to maintain the kind of positive public health metrics that we've been reporting daily now for almost 3 months. Now, with respect to our visit here today, obviously the partnership between the Salvation Army and MEMA and the other folks who are part of our Food Insecurity Task Force has done terrific work. We've recognized that we needed to augment the work that we've been doing, and earlier this spring we convened a Food Security Task Force to evaluate how we could best support food security efforts that were already underway. In May, we announced $56 million in investments to implement the recommendations of that Food Security Task Force, and one of those investments was a new $36 million food security infrastructure grant program to provide access to fresh local food. That grant program is open to organizations that are part of the Massachusetts local food system, including school meal programming, urban farms, and much, much more. Applications opened in June and are being evaluated on a rolling basis through September 15, 2020. Today we're excited to announce that the first round of grant recipients has been selected. The first round, we're awarding nearly $3 million to 26 organizations. The recipients include farms, school meals programs, food pantries, and organizations that are focused on food sourcing and distribution. Secretary Katie Theorides will go into more detail about the grant recipients in just a moment. And in the couple of weeks going forward, we'll obviously have more to say on future awardees. Those funds are part of that broader $56 million investment that implements the recommendations of the Food Security Task Force. Other investments include increased investments for the Healthy Incentive Program, which Secretary Sutters will talk about in a minute. $3 million in funding for immediate relief for food banks, which have played a key role in this initiative all along. $12 million for the provision of 25,000 family food boxes per week through a regional food supply system, and each family food box contains 30 to 35 meals. And that work will continue through the summer as needed. And we'll continue, obviously, to bring every resource to bear that we can, along with our partners who are part of this Food Security Task Force, to bring the fight against COVID to COVID, and at the same time do the work we need to do to help people who are dealing with food security issues. The legislature's been a tremendous partner in this. In fact, the SUP that we received yesterday included some money that we'd asked for to support a number of additional initiatives. I do want to thank them for their work, and at this point I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Governor. I wish to start by thanking the Salvation Army, board members, the volunteers, and all who come to work in this outstanding organization. Your tagline and your hashtag, doing the most good, clearly defines who you are. We're so proud of you for what you do in ordinary times, and what you've done during these extraordinary times is really remarkable and so appreciated. Thank you. It's great to be here to talk about agriculture and commercial fishing, which are integral parts of our Massachusetts economy. COVID-19 has led to dramatic shifts in the way consumers are interacting with food systems, from restaurants to schools to grocery needs at home. Massachusetts farmers, our fishermen, and other food businesses have worked hard to meet these challenges and respond to the crisis to support our Massachusetts residents. Our Food Security Task Force, the Governor referenced, found that there was a critical need to develop a system to connect processing, storage, and distribution resources to ensure ongoing supply of food. And in response, we developed an online platform as an additional tool. The Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, MDAR, in collaboration with the Division of Marine Fisheries, is in the final stage of developing an online platform called the Mass Grown Exchange to link food system channels and help facilitate business connections within the local food system. The platform is open to businesses looking to sell and purchase Massachusetts products and services. This includes farmers, fishermen, specialty food producers with wholesale products to sell to restaurants, grocery stores, and other outlets, or looking for services such as storage and distribution. Buyers including schools, food banks, retail outlets looking for local food products, and service and equipment providers working with businesses in the food system. We look forward to rolling out this exciting new online platform in the coming weeks, which will connect local businesses with supplies and resources and help support businesses and help them respond and also grow during these challenging economic times. In addition to the agricultural industry, the Commonwealth's commercial fishing industry has been hard hit by the pandemic. The Division of Marine Fisheries worked with fishing industry stakeholders to develop a plan to distribute $28 million in federal fisheries assistance from the CARES Act. The spending plan has been submitted to NOAA for approval, and DMF will work to distribute these funds quickly, pending approval. Last month, we also announced over $50,000 in grants to 3 projects to help the Commonwealth's local seafood industry sell fresh, locally caught products to Massachusetts consumers through promotion and awareness campaigns. We created this program 4 years ago to ensure the continued viability of Massachusetts' local commercial fishing and seafood industries. As the chair of the Seaport Economic Council, it's clear that we need to support coastal communities and our seafood workforce. I would also like to thank our colleagues in the legislature and members of the Food Security Task Force and the Seafood and Commercial Fishing Work Group, who have been tremendous partners. We've worked collaboratively, we've been creative, and we've come up with a good system to connect all these local resources. And special thanks to Representative Ann Margaret Ferrante, Representative Hannah Kane, Senators Bruce Tarr, and Joe Comerford for your hard work and effort. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. Please remember to do your part if you can to support our local food producers by buying and shopping local, visiting local. As Governor often says, we have so much to offer here in our Commonwealth. So let's do our part, not only to protect ourselves and others from the virus spread, but also to support our local businesses and all the great treasures in our great Commonwealth. With that, I'd now like to turn it over to Secretary Katie Theoharides.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. It's an honor to be here today, and I think to echo the Governor's and Lieutenant Governor's words, your resilience, the Salvation Army's resilience in being able to really utilize your partnerships and step up to this new challenge, which is an unprecedented one, has been incredible to see. So we really thank you for that. The pandemic, as the Governor mentioned, has highlighted how important it is to invest in our local food system and ensure that the food grown right here in the Commonwealth especially can be distributed to our residents, to vulnerable populations, and to underserved communities. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about this $36 million food security grant program a bit more, and our first round where we are releasing the first $3 million of the program. As the Governor and Lieutenant Governor noted, the program was developed as a recommendation of the Food Security Task Force, and the program aims to connect individuals and families throughout the Commonwealth to equitable access to fresh local food. Additionally, and really importantly, the program is designed to place our local food system and our local fishermen front and center in a resilient food system that has the ability, not just for this situation, but for future opportunities to really rely on that system and to allow it to be distributed across the Commonwealth. In the first round of the program, we're awarding almost $3 million in grants to 26 recipients, funding investments in technology, equipment, increased capacity, and other assistance to producers to help distribute food, as I mentioned, especially to vulnerable communities. And I'd like to highlight just a few of the programs that we're awarding today. One of the things we've seen is that the transition of schools to online learning has made it more difficult for schools to provide food to children in need. And school meal programs have been a part of this that we've worked really hard to ensure they can continue to operate even in a remote learning environment. Several schools and school districts have received grants to address this issue through this grant award, including Springfield Public Schools, which is receiving almost $500,000 through this opportunity today for equipment and supplies needed to ensure they can continue to provide prepackaged meals to over 25,000 students, both in school and for students should e-learning be taking place in the fall. Food banks and pantries have faced unprecedented demands. That's something we're seeing here for sure, for their services as vulnerable residents face urgent food insecurity. And the Salem Food Pantry has been awarded a grant to fund the development of a new food storage and distribution warehouse. We're seeing obviously the need for these things to grow with food vulnerability, as well as the purchase of a new van to support expanded food distribution to food insecure residents who can't make it out to a pantry themselves. As the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, the Commonwealth's agricultural and fishing industries have faced significant difficulties during the pandemic. However, annually, about 20% of our sales in agricultural products actually go direct to consumers, and it's something that the Commonwealth is historically very good at when compared to other states. This is the highest proportion of direct sales in the country. Some farms and fishermen have responded to the increased demand for local fresh food options during the pandemic by expanding their direct sales capabilities. And we've seen this whether it is folks looking to buy fish directly off boats or the incredible increase in community-supported agriculture and farmers markets that's been really a new piece of this. So through this grant program, the North of Boston farm in Boxford is receiving a grant to expand the farm's home delivery model and expand consumers with language and cultural barriers by funding equipment and translation services for their products. Ward Aqua Farms, an aquaculture farm in Falmouth, has received a grant to build a walk-in cooler installation so that they can begin direct sales of shellfish to consumers. These are just a few examples of innovative, important projects. Sometimes they're very simple, but they're things that the producers haven't had the opportunity to invest in the past. Importantly, applications for these grants will continue to be evaluated on a rolling basis. So this is just the first piece of the opportunity, and so I encourage food producers and others within the local food system, whether you're supporting a school meals program, a food pantry, or an urban farm, to continue to send in applications. The program really provides this opportunity to strengthen the diverse food system we have now and continue to build on it for the future. So thank you. I'll now turn it over to Secretary Sudders.
Good afternoon, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary Theourides, my good friend, Director Phillips from MEMA, and our extraordinary colleagues at the Salvation Army. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you for what you do each and every day in the Commonwealth to help families as part of the Commonwealth safety net. I also just want to acknowledge I'm going to be mentioning talking about the Healthy Incentives Program, but we had the opportunity to also walk through the Salvation Army's child care program, and I know they have submitted their application and look forward to reopening child care, another part of our safety net in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So as we've discussed, the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly impacted many families' financial stability across Massachusetts and has hit families and our residents who have historically experienced food insecurity particularly hard. Every individual, family, and community, of course, should have access to nutritious food, and that's why the COVID-19 Command Center convened a food security task force in April, made up of public agencies, the legislature, and members from private organizations to help deliver specific, tangible recommendations to address food security and food supply issues in the Commonwealth. As the Governor has mentioned, we announced a $56 million investment to address food security, which includes $5 million in additional funding to expand the Healthy Incentives Program, or otherwise referred to as HIP. In addition to increasing the food security for clients, this expansion also supports the resilience of the Commonwealth's food system during the COVID-19 pandemic and stimulates local economies where these vendors live and do business. The Healthy Incentives Program helps families and individuals who receive SNAP benefits to buy fresh, locally grown fruits and vegetables by providing matching benefits. So basically, for every dollar of your SNAP benefit in the HIP, every dollar is matched by another dollar. So it maximizes your SNAP benefits. If you buy fresh, locally grown fruits and vegetables for eligible produce purchases made from participating Massachusetts vendors at farmers markets, farm stands, mobile markets, and more. I'm also pleased to announce that today the HIP program will add an additional 39 vendors to its programs. These vendors join 200 existing HIP vendors across Massachusetts. The vast majority of selected applicants are local, small-scale farmers who live in or have close ties to the communities and populations they serve. Other selected applicants include local agriculture vendors like Rec Mobile Market in Central Mass or Sunderland Farm Collaborative in Western Massachusetts, with demonstrated capacity to serve high-need communities through delivery, mobile markets, and targeted outreach, particularly to address some of the food deserts that we have in terms of accessing fresh local foods to our SNAP beneficiaries. Vendors plan to serve communities in 12 of our 14 counties, and of the selected vendors, almost half will serve multiple communities, 2/3 will serve families in at least one gateway city, and almost a quarter serve towns that had no HIP access in 2019. I also want to take a moment to remind families about the availability of the Pandemic EBT, or PEBT card. DTA issued the second round of PEBT funds to families not receiving DTA benefits at the end of June. These benefits supplement the free and reduced price school meals children would have been receiving if not for school closures due to COVID. About 80% of our PEBT cards have been activated, but that means there's still thousands of families who can access this benefit. Over the coming weeks, DTA, in partnership with the Shaw Foundation and in collaboration with Project Bread, are conducting targeted outreach to increase the participation in PEBT in key cities. I want to thank the members of the Food Security Task Force for all of their work to ensure that we are supporting some of the Commonwealth's most vulnerable families during this time. Thank you. Governor?
Questions on this stuff? For me or anybody else?
Governor, how will it work with the 3 school scenarios when it comes to food? Is the system that flexible? I think Kate talked a little bit about it, kind of what they're doing, but if you have these 3 different scenarios and we may move shift gear during the school year, how will that
I mean, one of the more interesting things I learned about food distribution in Massachusetts generally when we put this food security task force together was how much of this is done, the actual distribution is done at the local level. There are lots of players in this at the food bank level and at the state level that represent what I would describe as sort of the top of the distribution system, folks like the Salvation Army. But as you get into the way this ultimately plays out community by community, a lot of this really is on the ground with respect to how distribution decisions get made. The second thing I would point out is many of the benefits that are available normally under traditional federal food programs are individual benefits, right? They're made available to people and families directly, and they can choose to use those benefits to purchase whichever way they want. And I think one of the things the PEBT card is all about is giving people resources in their hands that they can then choose to use to purchase in whatever way makes sense. Part of the success of the program generally here in Massachusetts has been the fact that people have been able to meet folks for the most part where they are on the ground in their communities. And the biggest challenge has been the volume increase, which we talked about here, but also the fact that the distribution system has to be safe with respect to COVID, which is part of the reason why you see so much of this being done by automobile. But I think one of the real benefits of the way this thing works is it does have the flexibility at the ground level to kind of meet people where they are depending upon whatever the particular approach a community pursues with regard to schools.
Governor, can you address some of the delays some people are seeing in test results? Some are 4, 6, even in some cases longer. Is the state doing anything about that to ramp that up?
Well, first of all, the vast majority of the tests in Massachusetts are turned around in 24 to 48 hours. We've been in many conversations with some of the larger national platforms about test turnaround time, and I do believe that within the next several weeks we should see some improvements with respect to their turnaround times. And if we were a state where our positive test rate was in the 20s or the 30s, I'd be out of my mind. But the fact, again, that people have done so many of the right things to help us get our positive test rate down to 1.5%, while the turnaround delays are frustrating, annoying, and incredibly difficult for people who are waiting to get the answer, they are a little less dangerous than they might be if we have much higher positive test rates. That said, almost all the testing that's being done at the hospital, I think all that's within 24 hours, and a lot of it's even ready tests. I mean, a lot of that stuff's being done, turned around within a few hours.
Governor, would you agree with the Red Sox, the Celtics, that the time has come for sports books, sports betting, and it could be a good shot in the arm for your bottom line at the time when you need revenue?
So the Lieutenant Governor and I filed a sports betting bill in January, didn't we? A long time ago. And we filed it in part because the states around us were heading in this direction anyway, and we wanted to give Massachusetts the ability to have people play here rather than playing elsewhere. And I absolutely believe that in addition to sort of the cross-border competition issues that would be addressed by doing something here in Massachusetts, it would certainly generate revenue, and it would be something that I think a lot of people would be interested in doing here at home as opposed to doing across the border. So we'd like to see that happen, yeah.
I guess we're a long distance away from the Black Sox scandal, and having athletes swayed by betting. Are you worried about the integrity of these games?
I think one of the nice things, one of the more important elements of the online stuff is it's traceable and trackable in a far more significant way than some of the stuff back in the day would have been. And the leagues are laying down some pretty heavy rules associated with anybody who engages in any way with any of that stuff, which I think will be very helpful.
Well, Governor, something you announced you're expanding the moratorium on evictions.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about why and what you say to small landlords who are telling us people are taking advantage of this and aren't necessarily struggling and hurting the small landlords
So the issue associated with both the eviction moratorium and the foreclosure moratorium during a pandemic was also made more complicated by the inability of people to access the courts, right, the housing court in particular, and the district court in some cases, but more often than not the housing court. The fact that the courts are now back in business is a hugely important element of working this process. And one of the reasons we made the decision to extend the moratorium for 60 days was one of the things we heard from a number of local municipal officials, from folks in the housing community as well as folks in the court system, was if you just give the courts time to actually start to work the process on this stuff in the normal course, they will be able to answer and solve a lot of these issues for people as they work their way through it. We've also put, through a variety of initiatives, pretty significant resources out there to support, in many cases, some of the small landlords you're talking about. The RAFT program, for example, which is rental assistance for families in the RAFT program is basically a direct pay on behalf of families to landlords. And we put about $20 million into that program, but we've also put significant resources into a number of other housing programs as well to help people work their way through. The other thing I would say is we've also heard from a lot of small businesses who've said to us, you know, I've only been open for a few weeks here or a month, and if I had a little more time to be open so I could catch up on my outstanding rent obligations, I can get back to current with my landlord, but if the decision is going to get made on August 18th, that's going to be a problem for me. So I think there are a number of really good reasons for sort of giving people an opportunity to work their way through this, given the situation and circumstance that so many people have found themselves in. No, we, yeah.
Some cities have been reporting coronavirus cases rising with people in their 20s and 30s over the past couple weeks. Have you heard of that at all? Are you concerned about it?
So we are currently doing a pretty deep dive on all of our test results from the past few weeks, and we'll probably have more to say about that later this week. But I certainly think that the people in Massachusetts, on balance, have done all the right things with respect to face coverings, distancing, and sort of basic infection and hygiene control opportunities. We have seen some of the same trends that you're talking about with respect to younger people, and like I said, we're doing a pretty deep dive on all that data. We'll have more to say about it later this week.
Anyone else?
Yeah. So one of the things the Lieutenant Governor and I have said many times around our available law enforcement resources is we go where we're invited, okay? If you talk to mayors, city managers, city councilors, town administrators, select boards, about the process and the way we've gone about working with them around issues associated with public safety, we don't go where we're not invited. I mean, our view is really simple on this. The local folk, we're former local officials, okay? Local officials know on the ground what the best thing and the best policy is for their communities. And if people want our help, they are going to get it. And I am incredibly proud of the fact, not just on the local official side or among our state resources or our National Guard, but we had 300 demonstrations that had more than 100 people, and we had dozens of more than 1,000, and we had one bad night. And for the better part of the past 20, 25 days or so, people have been able to peacefully express and exercise their First Amendment rights in a way that I believe has worked here in Massachusetts. And I think part of that's because we only play if we get asked.
Anyone step out?
Said yesterday, they support your bill in terms of
Yeah.
certification and everything, but they say you've been silent for too long, and they also want you to stand up and support law enforcement. I'd like to respond to that.
Well, first of all, we spent almost a year working with the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus and the law enforcement community to create a certification and decertification process in Massachusetts, which we need and we should have, because that becomes the vehicle through which you can actually identify and remove people who shouldn't be law enforcement officers and aren't living up to the oath and the performance of their peers. Okay? And the reason we spent a year working on that was because we wanted to make sure everybody understood the elements that we were talking about, the definitions we were using, what we were trying to accomplish, and that's why we filed the bill in June. I think my hope is that as this process goes on with the legislature, that we get a workable and credible accountability and transparency system with respect to law enforcement that comes out of this process. There's a lot of elements there in the House. There are a lot of elements there in the Senate. The House debate starts today. They need to work their way through some of that. But I would just say that part of what made, I believe, the process that we used work was the fact that we spent a long time on it. People understood what the definitions were, what the consequences would be, how the rules we were proposing would actually play out, and they supported it. And that, in some respects, I think, is what I really hope comes out of this process, which is something people can actually understand how it's going to work, what it's going to mean, what the consequences are going to be, not just for individuals, but also for cities and towns, for communities, for the public at large, for the Commonwealth.
Last question. Parents are trying to figure out their school year.
Yeah.
And it may come down to just a couple of weeks to figure out if they're going to have to go to daycare and all these juggling. Any words to these parents, fellow parents?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I think we're up to about 65% of the child care community is licensed, is back and open and operating, which is thousands of providers, right?
There were 8,200 providers pre-pandemic, and there's now 6,300.
Okay, 8,200 child care providers pre-pandemic, 6,300 that are now licensed and operating. So we're making a lot of progress there in terms of creating capacity for people. One of the things the folks at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education have done, which I think was the right way to go, is they've said, look, based on what you hear from the public health folks, from the pediatric community, from a lot of the child mental health folks, is the socialization and the development issues associated with kids being in school are incredibly powerful and positive. And our goal should be to try to figure out how to make that work if we can. And we now have examples of how it's working in many school districts and in many countries all over the world. And there are big lessons to be learned from that. But at the same time, we're still figuring out the fiscal 21 budget, right? We're still waiting on whatever it is the feds are going to do with respect to the next round of COVID relief, which we expect is going to be debated sometime this week and is probably going to include resources for education and for state municipal governments. We put about $900 million out to cities and towns across the Commonwealth that can be used to invest in some of the things they would need to do to open schools and to support teachers and administrators. But I get the fact that there are still some balls that are up in the air here, and we're hoping that those issues will be resolved sometime in the next couple of weeks, and that people can actually take the guidance and the data and the information, understand what the resources are going to be, and see what they can do about supporting a safe reopening of schools.
Governor, do you have concerns about federal money drying up for the contact tracing program? I know you're a big proponent of it. President Trump seems to have gone back and forth on whether he thinks more money might be forthcoming in another round of the CARES Act. I won't get these numbers exactly right, which will make Terry crazy, but we have the contract. Remember, this is collaborative, right? So if the local boards of health could handle the case as it came in as a positive test, they would take it. If they couldn't handle it because they had too many, they would turf it to Partners in Health, and Partners in Health would chase that one down. Between the two of them, between the local boards of health and Partners in Health, somewhere around 85%
of the cases that came in got outreach and contact, okay? And that includes both the original case that came in as well as the follow-up on close contacts. And I think that's probably among the highest hit rates in the country with respect to actually being able to make some of those connections happen and help people isolate. In fact, this organization was very helpful in providing food support for people who were engaged with the contact tracing program so that they could in fact isolate either at home or in another location while they were dealing with their own issue associated with COVID. At this point in time, we have the resources, we believe, to successfully fund our program through the third CARES Act. But I would just point out that the way we're thinking about this at this point in time is a little different than the way we were thinking about it a few months ago. And I'm sure when you look at what's going on in other parts of the country, it would not be surprising to me if many other parts of the country, especially in the South and West, could use the financial support of the federal government to both stand up and expand their existing programs.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks, and thanks again for being here, and thank you to the Salvation Army.